2021, the IFIP 2021 Founders Retreat, moving forward together as a community. I invite you to please turn on your cameras as we enter this virtual community space with open hearts and open minds, and to join us on a traditional opening ceremony. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Alma Hilda Lopez Mejia, a Maya Quiche woman. Alma is a human rights and indigenous peoples' rights activist and a defender of women's rights. She has over 25 years of experience in issues of gender and individual and collective rights of indigenous women. Her extensive experience includes interculturality, public policy, governance, advocacy, and communication for change, as well as experience on project management and research processes in local, non-governmental, governmental, and international organizations. In 2018, Alma was awarded the Bartolomé de las Casas Prize for her extraordinary work in defense of and empowerment of indigenous women. Alma will speak in Spanish. She will be guiding us through the traditional opening ceremony. So please take a moment to find the Spanish interpretation if you need that. I want to express our gratitude to FIMI, who is partnering with us this year for the opening and closing offering. With that, estimada Alma, muchas gracias por estar con nosotras este día, por aceptar la invitación a hacer la invocación, y te doy la palabra.
Muy buenos días a todas y todos. Agradezco las energías del día, por esta mañana, por esta mitad de día. Yo estoy en Guatemala. Y para empezar voy a encender una vela, porque la vela, desde nuestras cosmovisiones como pueblos y como pueblos indígenas y como mujeres indígenas originarias, representan la luz de la energía femenina, la luz de los liderazgos, el entramado de las historias de muchas abuelas, abuelos que dejaron el plano tierra y que se hicieron una a través de la vida y el ser de cada una de nosotras y nosotros. También voy a ofrecer agua, el agua como elemento que limpia, que regenera, que avanza y que no se detiene, pero que también nos da vida. Y la energía de las flores, que también representan la fuerza, el poder de la Madre Tierra. La fuerza, el poder de quienes hoy estamos aquí vivas y presentes, siendo una del universo, siendo una con el aire, con el viento, con el sol. En esa fuerza de estos elementos, quiero saludar al corazón, al espíritu y al ser íntegro de cada una y de cada uno de ustedes, regresando con toda nuestra fuerza, con toda nuestra luz. Les voy a invitar a que sintamos en esta posición de nuestras manos, si lo podemos hacer quienes sienta su corazón. En esta posición de nuestras manos estamos guardando lo más profundo del ser, de nuestro ser, como mujeres, como pueblos, como liderazgos, como humanidad. En este espacio triangular de nuestra existencia, vamos a honrar respirando fuertemente. Esta energía que nos invade como mujeres que estamos vivas y presentes en este hoy, pero que también hemos dejado semillas en ese pasado que se nos adelantó y que nos está haciendo avanzar con pasos fuertes y determinados. Con esta fuerza del espíritu dentro de nuestras manos, lo vamos a pasar en toda nuestra cabeza, lentamente. La vamos a llevar a nuestros ojos. para ver lo que el universo y la Madre Tierra nos regalan. La vamos a pasar a los oídos para tener la certeza de escuchar con sabiduría. La vamos a pasar en nuestra boca para que de aquí salgan palabras de verdad, salgan palabras de armonía, para que la sabiduría se haga palabras en nuestra boca y en nuestra lengua. La vamos a pasar en nuestra nariz para que esa energía nos permita inhalar energía de luz y exhalar energía de oscuridad. Este movimiento lo vamos a pasar por en medio de nuestro corazón y allí vamos a albergar esa fuerza, esa energía y esa paz que demanda la Madre Tierra, que demanda la humanidad, que demanda el universo, que demanda todo lo que nos rodea, desde lo material, lo espiritual y lo físico, pero sobre todo que rodea nuestro ser. Pasamos de nuevo en esta posición y vamos a abrir nuestras manos y vamos a ofrecernos a nosotras y nosotros que vamos a estar reunidos en este encuentro para que la fuerza de esos liderazgos sean reconocidos principalmente entre nosotras y entre nosotros y luego se permitan hacer voces de verdad, de sabiduría y de conocimientos. Ofrendamos al frente de todas esa luz que logramos llevar hacia nosotras y le vamos a decir a la Madre Agua, gracias por limpiar nuestro camino, gracias por refrescar nuestra mente, gracias por limpiar nuestro corazón y gracias por darme fuerza y dejar fluir mi vida. Ponemos la vela y sintamos que esa luz fuerte que ven en sus pantallas está llegando y está irradiando energías de verdad y de fuerza, de sabiduría y de luz a la vida de cada una y de cada uno de ustedes, de nosotras. Está llegando esta luz a darnos fuerza para que nuestros liderazgos permitan tejer caminos anchos, planos y blancos hacia donde estamos encaminando nuestros pasos, como organización, como institución, como grupo, como colectivo, aún en nuestras diferencias, que esta luz nos haga ser una sola, uno solo. Ahora saludamos a la fuerza de la Madre Tierra, agradeciendo todo lo que de ella recibimos. Recibimos el alimento diario, el maíz, los granos, el arroz, las frutas, las hortalizas, y recibimos la vida, porque la Madre Tierra es la que nos sostiene. Y hoy estas flores, estas violetas, las ofrezco desde lo más profundo para cada una y cada uno, porque representa el corazón de fuerza que tenemos las mujeres desde la energía femenina. Y con esta fuerza agradecemos una vez, agachamos la cabeza, agradecemos 2 veces y agradecemos 3 veces ese regalo de la fuerza. Y juntos los 3 elementos, el agua, la Madre Tierra y la luz, vamos a invocar con fuerza y determinación que hoy somos quienes estamos tejiendo este hoy, que recogimos del pasado que se nos adelantó, de la fuerza y la historia de nuestras ancestras y ancestros, y que vamos hacia adelante para conducir esos liderazgos desde nuestra propia identidad. Esos liderazgos que no buscan el poder colonial, que no buscan el poder capital, sino que buscan el poder colectivo. Y esos liderazgos que nos van a enseñar y que nosotros vamos a socializar con otras y con otros. Y con esta fuerza yo voy a simbolizar y voy a compartir estas gotas de agua para cada una de ustedes y para cada uno. Y recibamos estas gotas de agua desde lo más profundo de nuestros espíritus. Y sintamos que las gotas del agua fresca nos están pasando por todo el ser y nos está limpiando de todo aquello, de un dolor, de una angustia, de una preocupación, de una tristeza, de un miedo, de un desafío que siento que no puedo pasar. y siento que este agua me está limpiando desde los ojos, la nariz, la boca, los oídos, los pensamientos y el corazón. Y siento que este agua me va a correr el corazón, el pecho, el vientre, las piernas, las rodillas y los pies. Y este agua me va a sentar para ayudarme a buscar equilibrio. Con fuerza y con determinación vamos a pensar que todas vamos a recibir la luz de la vela y nos la vamos a pasar. Yo se las paso a cada una. Sientan el calor de la vela en su rostro, sientan el calor de la vela en sus manos, en sus brazos, en su espíritu, en su corazón y en todo su ser. Y el calor de esta vela va a iluminar y va a alumbrar su camino, va a ayudar a que este encuentro que tejamos hoy tenga un resultado para seguir avanzando. Y por último, les regalo la fuerza y la energía de las flores para que su perfume, su alegría, su color irradie en los corazones de todas y todos. Irradie con fuerza, irradie con alegría y les permita avanzar. Y les voy a pedir que pongamos las manos hacia arriba, quienes lo puedan hacer, quienes lo sientan hacer. Recibir la energía, estamos recibiendo toda la energía, si es de tarde, si es de noche, si es de mañana. Recibamos la energía que nos está regalando el cielo. Todas somos el cielo en la tierra. Todas hemos venido a cumplir una misión y todos recibimos con fuerza esa fuerza del cielo en la tierra que somos nosotras y la pasamos al centro de nuestro pecho. En esta posición vamos a recibir de quienes estamos en este encuentro su fuerza. Sientan que están recibiendo esa fuerza de sus liderazgos. Y en esta posición devolvemos la fuerza que nosotras queremos dar a esos liderazgos. Sintamos cómo las ondas de nuestra energía se liberan y nos dan fuerza. Y con esta fuerza vamos a pasar y nos vamos a dar un abrazo fuerte, cruzado, profundo. Y nos vamos a agradecer nuestra existencia, nuestro origen, nuestra llegada a este plano tierra. Y vamos a agradecer a abuelas, abuelos, al vientre de nuestra madre, a la semilla de nuestro padre, que nos permitieron estar y nos regalaron la vida. Con ese abrazo, ahora vamos a hacer este movimiento y vamos a darle un abrazo a todas y todos los que están al otro lado de sus pantallas. Y les decimos gracias, si lo podemos decir en voz alta y encender los micrófonos, gracias por permitirme el regalo de estar aquí, si lo podemos repetir. Gracias por permitirme el regalo de compartir aquí.
Gracias.
Gracias por compartir la posibilidad de ser una con todas y todos. Y nos volvemos a dar un abrazo y nos abrazamos fuerte y nos agradecemos a este cuerpo, a este nuestro territorio que nos permite existir y estar. Que las energías de las abuelos, abuelas y que los ancestros acompañen su camino, su trabajo y su luz. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Alma. I'm going to speak in Spanish for a few words. Muchas gracias, Alma, por acompañarnos, por esta invocatoria, por invitarnos a empezar este espacio tan importante en armonía, en una manera solidaria, con los corazones abiertos y con la mente abierta para recibir y también dar con nuestras palabras. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos nuevamente. Estás invitada a continuar a estar con nosotros durante el resto del día, si pudieses. Y ahora es mi tiempo para dar la bienvenida a este espacio de encuentro. So I just share a few words. You got the interpretation. So I wanted to, it's hard to continue after following the words that Alma shared with us. But I want to now do an official welcome on behalf of International Funders for Indigenous Peoples. Thank you for prioritizing your time to be here with us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lourdes Singa. I am Quechua descent from Peru. And I have been the executive director of IFIP for the last 4 years, since 2017. I'm joining today from the ancestral lands of the Maidu and Nisenan peoples here in Northern California. It is my pleasure again to welcome you for our 3-day retreat. The theme, as you might have probably seen, is moving forward together as a community, which is where we ended off last year's funder convening. We felt appropriate that we should go deeper into this conversation as to how we move forward together as a community. Now, I want to take a moment to thank our wonderful planning committee. This process of the design and the agenda and the questions, it was all possible because of the wisdom, the input, the suggestions, the questions, and that our planning committee, made up by Kim Lambecker of Sacred Fire Foundation, Christine Osawa of Santana Institute, Salote Soko of Unitarian University Committee, all played a role in contributing to making and shaping the agenda, as well as the program committee of the board. To the planning committee, again, your partnership, your openness and trust to try something new, and your ability to see the vision of what IFIP was trying to accomplish at this year's retreat. It's what's going to make this retreat creating the space of going deeper into topics, allowing for more discussions and moving away from the usual plenary keynotes and panels. I also want to now share my warm appreciation for Lauren Ellen McCann of Build With and Anka Matiok of La Sobremesa, who are facilitating the convening over the next days. They have played a role in working with the IFIP team on co-designing and bringing their expert advice and wisdom and skills and facilitation. As with any other retreat and convening and conference, we know it takes a large group of people to make all the fantastic technical and support and logistical support to make a convening successful. So I want to take a moment to thank the team of DCA Virtual Assistant for providing logistics and admin support during and after the convening, for our language interpreters who are here with us, to the team of All Hands in Motion, who will provide the text transcription services to make this an inclusive convening for language and also people of all abilities. And then next, I want to thank our board. I want to express my deep gratitude to the leadership of the IFIP board. I think your commitment to IFIP is like no other. Your wisdom and your dedication are making possible for IFIP to continue in its path to reach new goals and its full potential. Your guidance and aspirations and throughout the year and since I've joined have been incredible, and I'm very appreciative of all the time you give to the team. And your trust in the team is what makes it possible to realize not only our strategic objectives, but also to try new things, take risks, and take bold steps, all which are necessary to shift how philanthropy partners and supports Indigenous peoples, as well as makes room for Indigenous peoples' leadership in philanthropy. So with that, I'd like to now invite Suzanne Benally, our IFIP co-chair, to share a few words. Suzanne Benally is Navajo and Santa Clara Tewa. She grew up in the community of Shikro, New Mexico on the Navajo Nation, and she's the executive director of the SWIFT Foundation. Suzanne has worked in higher education and the nonprofit sector for 30 years. Most recently, she served as executive director of cultural survival and formerly served as the executive vice president for academic affairs at Naropa University. She's deeply committed to social, environmental, and climate justice. Her work, passion, and interest, for anyone that knows her, centers on relationships and interconnectedness between land, spirituality, culture, and people as reflected in their narratives and stories, past and present. Suzanne is trustee of the Naropa University Board of Trustees and is a co-chair of the IFIP Board of Directors. Suzanne, I welcome you to take the floor.
Thank you, Lourdes. Thank you for the kind introduction. Good morning or good afternoon. On behalf of the International Funders for Indigenous Peoples Board of Directors, I would like to welcome you today to the 2021 IFIP virtual retreat. As introduced, my name is Suzanne Benally. I am Navajo and Santa Clara Tewa. My maternal clan is Kinswachini, and I was born for the Nashashi people. I am, as Lourdes noted, I am from Shiprock, New Mexico, was raised there on the Navajo Nation, as well as in Santa Clara Pueblo in northern New Mexico. The next few days provides an opportunity to engage in dialogue about philanthropy and Indigenous peoples, their local communities, and lands and territories. I stress Indigenous peoples, communities, and land together to acknowledge a distinct Indigenous worldview that is based on deep kinship relationships with the land and with each other and with all living things. Further, respecting these relationships is based on reciprocity, which produces intersecting and interdependent relationships, which over time, over millennia, has created a practical holism, a way of understanding, a way of being and living, a practiced philosophy, and a spiritual foundation for Indigenous people. When we come together as funders to dialogue about philanthropy and Indigenous people, we must recognize a complex system of practiced values and understanding of the natural world based on relationship and reciprocity. The challenge for philanthropy is that the Indigenous worldview cannot be interpreted through a Western Eurocentric framework. So how do we listen? How do we understand? And how do we do this work? Today, more than ever, with deep social and environmental and climate injustices and climate change, we are at the precipice of determining human survival. We know that Indigenous peoples and their communities are severely impacted by climate change and facing relocations, dislocations, and tremendous land loss and cultural interruption. We have an imperative to act today. We hear and use the phrase 7 generations out. This is essentially referring to our actions, the here and now, and our decisions and directions made today. Philanthropic organizations have resources and money to influence and shape today and tomorrow. IFIP has been asserting the leadership role of Indigenous-led funding, or that Indigenous-led funding can take for many years, along with other NGOs, and many of us stand behind that, including myself as the executive director of the SWIFT Foundation. We have to ask, what does it mean to be truly Indigenous-led, Indigenous representing, and Indigenous serving? What does it mean to recognize and honor and support a distinct worldview? Further, to support Indigenous peoples holding this worldview and negotiating contemporary lives and survival in it, we need to grapple with these questions and issues if we are to decolonize philanthropy. We have much to talk about over the next few days, and in the true spirit of listening, feeling, dialogue, and consensus, I call on all of us to meet these challenges, beginning at the foundations we represent. It is about change. Lourdes and her team are providing the opportunity through a carefully thought through agenda. I invite everyone's voices to shape this story for the future, and I look forward to all of us in conversation. Enjoy the Learning Institute, and thank you. Lourdes, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Suzanne, for your kind words and for welcoming to our to the start of the 3 days of the retreat. I'd like to now share my screen, so please give me a moment to do that. And I'm gonna ask someone in my team to just confirm that I have the right slide up. Are you seeing my screen? Just need a bit of confirmation. Yeah, all right.
Yes.
Thank you. So again, thank you, Suzanne, for opening the retreat on behalf of the board. I wanna now take a moment to say a few words, and I start by thanking our members, for thanking the funders who are being with us, our Indigenous partners, and our friends and allies. In your actions, in your influencing, in your advocacy, in your solidarity, and in your grant making, you have the ability to make a difference. You have the ability to shift power. You have the ability to make room for Indigenous peoples in philanthropy. And you have the ability to keep your peers, other funders, accountable. I thank you for prioritizing this retreat. I know we have experienced another full year of the impact of COVID, which translated into many more virtual events that we could ever imagine. I also know that we have come in and ending a year full of global events, most recently the COP. So I really appreciate you making the time to be here. It is with you that IFIP is able to do what it does. And in fact, without you, IFIP would not be in a position to celebrate our accomplishments, to bring our ideas, our plans, and our goals and aspirations for how we want to transform philanthropy. It is also together, and I think in the spirit of last year's convening and this year's retreat, that we must keep each other accountable, not only accountable to the words that we are expressing, but also to the commitments that we're making. And that includes accountable to each other as peers, but also accountable to the Indigenous movement. Now, none of the work that IFIP does would be possible without the dedication and incredible work and the spirit that the new IFIP team brings. I want to take a moment to honor this incredible IFIP team. I'm very, very excited that we are here in 2021 and that we're about to end the year with a 5-staff team for the first time in our history of IFIP. And it's a big step on one step that I see as many steps to come. But let me take a moment to introduce each one of them. And you have been exchanging emails. You probably already emails, phone calls with them, but I want to just honor this space and introduce each one of them. And I'll start with Rachel Smith, who joined us in August 2019 as program coordinator of the Indigenous Territories Working Group. Last year, we also celebrated another milestone in welcoming a new team member, Winnie Cody, as Membership and Communications Coordinator. And this year, a big year for IFIP, we have the pleasure of welcoming more recently, in August, Qualnesca Tonantzin Miranda, who is the operations coordinator here at IFIP. And last but not least, we welcome Shanta Chapa, who is our first ever program director at IFIP, who only just joined in October. As you may see, we are based, we're three of us are based in Northern California, but Winnie is based in Nairobi, and Shanda is based in Kathmandu. And in thinking about IFIP's growth and IFIP's directions, we thought it was critically important to make sure that IFIP was also making space and opening opportunities for Indigenous professionals who are entering philanthropy and who are rooted and grounded on the realities of Indigenous communities throughout the various regions of the world. So thank you to my dear colleagues for your good humor. We know that planning big events takes a lot of effort, a lot of sometimes fine challenges, and I thank you for walking along that pathway with me. Now, where are we? I want to take a moment to just again honor where we have come from and where we're going. And this is just a representation of some of the things that we've been kind of doing and working through the last 5 years. We're going through this phase in late 2016 to starting 2018 of an organizational transition, really deep on an organizational transition in 2017, just at the same time as we had adopted a new strategic framework. We brought in a lot of focus on strengthening our financial systems, and went into 2018 into really moving into implementing the strategic framework by launching new programs, continue to strengthen our operations, as well as hosting the first ever global gathering of Indigenous-led funds at the IFIP 2018 conference. Moving on into 2019 and 2020, we start moving into the more of the strategy implementation, really kind of seeing how the new programs were unfolding and re-energizing together with all of your members and bringing in also new members into this community space. We hosted the second gathering of Indigenous-led funds, and quickly after that, we were able to see that the work with Indigenous-led funds as well was going to be starting to take more center stage in some of the objectives and goals that IFIP needs to focus on. We welcome again, a new program coordinator, continue to focus on strengthening the organization, and then went into 2020, and we know what happened in 2020. We had big plans to celebrate our 20th anniversary, but we had to adapt and quickly adapted to respond to the impacts of COVID, but nevertheless, we were able to accomplish some big things in 2020, including bringing a new staff. Now we're ending the year in 2021, again, celebrating the fact that we have 2 new team members. Our team as a whole is new. We have a lot of ideas on how we want to continue to both strengthen, influence, and grow IFIP, but you're going to have to wait until day 3 for us to share some of those ideas, plans, and to hear from you other ways that you'd like to kind of see IFIP grow and the role that you like to play as part of that work that we still need to do to move more resources to Indigenous peoples, but also transform how philanthropy partners with Indigenous peoples. Now, I want to start, sorry about the slides, they keep on moving. I want to just now bring us into the space why we're here today. And before we go into the retreat portion, I want us to remind us of the 4 R's of Indigenous philanthropy on how we're entering this space. I think Alma was, I appreciated Alma's words because I think she conveyed everything that we have been kind of thinking about on how we want to carry these 3 days together. So I invite you to please practice the 4 R's of Indigenous philanthropy, which are responsibility, building relationships, respect, and reciprocity. I also invite you to be open to both learning and unlearning as we enter into conversations and listen to each other in terms of like sharing ideas and how we can kind of move more of this work over the next 2 years and to 3 years. So as you probably saw when you were registering and you didn't see it, you still have a chance to look at the report of last year's convening. We're really building on that last year's convening. There are a lot of rich conversations. I only captured 2 of the images of the graphic recorders, but by no means captured all the conversations that we had last year. But where are we kind of sort of going with this is that we're going to continue to think about how do we center Indigenous leadership in philanthropy, making space for Indigenous peoples, but also bringing them into the decision-making into various critical spaces. We're ending the year with so many global events that just happened, including the COP. So how do we make space and make sure there are Indigenous peoples are at the table of this big decision-making policy work and decisions that are being made at the global scale. Last year, we talked about we continue to build the capacity of funders to decolonize work. And we had wonderful ideas, but what we are trying to do with the retreat is really centering on what steps will you take and will you take with us, with IFIP, to continue to kind of push change in philanthropy. And to just, before I hand it over to Anka, I like to just kind of call your attention again that we're building on last year's conversations. These were some of the results of the last year's surveys. Many of the things that you express through the surveys, we have taken into account. You'll see that there's some of those conversations that's continuing here, and that we're going to be creating the space in day 3 to really kind of work together in a Minka style. How do we actually kind of commit to work with each other to realize some of these ideas, some of these suggestions, some of these plans over the next months to the next 2 years. So with that, let me just stop sharing my screen. And I like to now invite Anka to join me on the spotlight, please. Great, thank you. So let me introduce you to Anka. Anka has been working on Lauren Ellen, who is also her partner in crime, but couldn't be here with us these 3 days. And has been working with us over the last months to bring this retreat to you. Anka is the founder and director of La Sobremesa, a consultancy that specializes in design and facilitation of processes of transformation that strengthens a civil society ecosystem. She was born in Romania, passed through the United States, Chile, and is now based in Mexico. Over the past 10 years, ANCA has supported and worked with dozens of civil society organizations and networks with a focus in Latin America and a focus on transparency, anti-corruption, and human rights actors. So with that, I transfer it over to you, ANCA, to lead us through the 3 days of our retreat.
Thank you, Lourdes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you especially to Alma and to Suzanne, who I think started us off on the best foot. I still am feeling that energy. So thank you. As Lourdes said, I'm Anca Matioc from La Sobremesa, based here in Ciudad de Mexico, Mexico. And yes, it is through this capacity of working with La Sobremesa that we were invited in by IFIP to help bring their vision to fruition. And I hope that we did just that. So we took IFIP through, I would say, a rather intensive co-design process. And that was the IFIP core team, but also the planning committee and the board members as well, who all participated, as well as all of your ideas that Lourdes just showed on screen from last year's retreat. And what we really wanted was to create a participatory space for everyone to move forward together. And with that, let me share my screen to show you exactly how that happened. So welcome again to the IFIP Funder Retreat 2021. We are currently in day 1 of the retreat, of the 3-day retreat. So what I want to do is take you guys through the 3 days agenda and think about like the core questions and really see how the arc is going to come together. So today, day 1, we're going to talk about how did we get here, right? We're going to have breakout sessions where you can all discuss in a very participatory way about these 2 topics. We'll also have interactives that also kind of grapple with this one question of how did we get here. So in day 1, we're going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 and response from Indigenous communities, and also Indigenous rights and self-determination at this moment of climate change, right? So what has led us to the place that we are today? Tomorrow, or day 2, we're going to be grappling with the question, where are we currently? What do we want and need? So we're going to have 3 breakouts happening in parallel that day. We're going to look at what does solidarity look like for us in addressing the continued impact of racism and colonization on Indigenous peoples globally today, ensuring effective and meaningful representation of intersectional groups within Indigenous communities, and moving forward, decolonizing philanthropy. Where are we and what's needed, right? So we'll have gone from day 1 where we're looking back. Day 2 is going to be taking a look at where we are today. And day 3 is going to be answering the question, where are we going and how will we get there? This is, as Lourdes was just sharing with us, the commitments day. How can we commit individually, but also as a collective to move us forward, right? So we're going to be answering the questions, where are we going and how will we get there? There's going to be 3 breakouts again happening simultaneously around Indigenous-led funds, roles and lessons of philanthropy and their commitment, and collaboration to extend support to Indigenous communities and smaller organizations. And finally, funder accountability to the communities they claim to be serving and supporting. So that's the arc of the 3 days. And we're gonna leave on day 3 looking forward, right? Hearing also from the IFIP team on what their new plans are for the next year. And also again, thinking collectively as members of the IFIP community, what is our role and what can we do during this next year to move ourselves forward? So those are the 3 days. There are, all of you currently are in track A, welcome. You're in track A, so that is happening at this time every day. And then we have a sister track, that is track B. that is for our colleagues in Australia and Asia and other regions, but is also open to all of you to participate if you would like to stay up a little later and hear and share from your other colleagues as well. So that is also open. And we're trying to embrace and try to really get connections going through the 2 tracks by a few ways with the buddy system, which I know that a few of you are participating in. So in the buddy system, what we've done is we've paired a person from track A with a person from track B so that they can connect and talk throughout the conference. We're also going to record the sessions as we're recording this session throughout all of the conference. And we're going to play at the top of each track. So in the opening huddle, we're going to play a quick presentation of what was discussed in the breakouts. So that way there's going to be hopefully a bit of continuity between track B and track A. So you'll at least hear from your other colleagues in the other parts of the world. So that is track A and track B. I want to quickly go over swap card. I know as any new technology, I know this isn't new for some of you who were here last year, but for me, for example, it was new. It took me a little while to get used to it. I wanted to draw your attention to the beautiful and colorful menu that we have here. So there you can find the agenda, the list of attendees, the speakers and facilitators, partners and service providers, the live help desk, and frequently asked questions, right? And I want to draw your attention specifically to the agenda and how to kind of get the most of it. So I'm going to show you guys here. So you can see the 3 days of agenda clicking here, right? And just some cool things that you can do with the agenda if we want to sneak a peek as to what we have in each of the sessions. There's a description of the session here, which the IFIP team kindly put together for us. And also, again, to facilitate more connections amongst you all, you can click on someone like, for example, Lourdes Inga here. And you can see her description here. You can link with her in social media, and you can also send her a little message to connect. So we can just say, hi, Lourdes, thanks for everything. And then we send a connection. So we send a connection, and you guys can also do that throughout the entire retreat. You don't need to be in a specific session to do that. And we encourage you to, because again, this is a community and we want it to feel as such, even though it is virtual. And then we have this other piece that is really useful, which is this live help desk, which has already been in use. And congratulations, I now am officially connected to Lourdes, which is great news. So the help desk here, anyone can ask a question at any time, right? It's going to be, this space is going to be open during the sessions, outside of sessions. So feel free to ask your questions, and then someone from IFIP or honestly another participant might answer your question for you, okay? There's gonna be someone from the IFIP team on the help desk at all times, also possibly myself. So we will be here to answer all of your questions. And again, if you want any other support during a Zoom session, feel free to send a direct message to anyone from the IFIP team. And we can also answer your questions on the Zoom chat direct message as well. So you have the help desk and the Zoom chat. So that is swap card. Then I'm gonna take you guys through community agreements. These are the community agreements that the IFIP team and I put together based on exactly what Lourdes was just describing around the 4 R's of Indigenous philanthropy, right? And we go a little bit more into depth into some pieces. So first, again, as a reminder, we want to embody, especially in the breakout sessions where there's going to be a lot of participation over the next 3 days, we want to embody the 4 R's of Indigenous philanthropy. So that's respect, responsibility, reciprocity, and relationships. We also want you all, of course, as a respect and a responsibility thing. We want you to be as present as possible, right? So minimize distractions. I know we're all working from home. That's sometimes not possible. You might hear my dog every now and then in the background. We're trying to minimize it, but we really want you to be present in the conversations, right? This is a really amazing opportunity that you all have once a year to get together with all your colleagues. So really do try and be present in those moments. Take space, make space. For someone like myself who is a known talker, I would recommend to myself to maybe take a back seat, especially if I hear myself talking a lot in the breakout sessions, right? And asking and encouraging other participants to also share what it is that they're thinking, that they're feeling in the breakout sessions. Be open to new ideas. This is a very diverse group. Not everyone comes from the same background, has the same experiences or expertise or way of thinking and working. So please do be open to new ideas and really sit and grapple with them during the breakout sessions. We hope that you have enough time to do that. If not, there's always room for even more connection afterwards. Then we're going on to yes and. So instead of the perhaps too usual yes, but, we encourage the yes and approach, right? We want it to be a constructive space, a collaborative space, and we don't want to shut down experiences or ideas from others. So we want to use the and to construct. And finally, use I statements. This one's pretty straightforward, but it's always helpful to remind everyone. Share from your own experience. This is also why your colleagues are hopefully excited to be in a room with you. We want to hear from your own experiences. So please do use those I statements. All right, and before I move on, I wanted to extend the invitation to you all. I'm sure there's some facilitators in the room, but there's also a lot of people who have participated in quite a few Zooms and also in-person sessions. So if there are any community agreements that you wanted to add to this list, we very much encourage you to add some community agreements to our chat here in Zoom right now. I'll give you a few minutes to do that. While you do that, I'll just say that we're going to be reviewing these community agreements before we get into each breakout session. So we'll see it right before we start embodying it. And again, we really want this to be, as the initial vision was created, a very participatory space, but in a respectful, responsible, reciprocal way that takes care of the relationships that we have. Let me see if there's any. Okay. Speaking slowly for interpretation and understanding. Thank you, Mariana. Yes, that is a great addition, especially since it is, as I was saying, such a diverse group. So most definitely we will add that to the list. And again, if you have others, we'll be collecting them on the Zoom chat. We'll be on the lookout for those. Now I want to take you all to start the morning huddle, which we'll have every morning before we start the work, the collective work, the gathering. So the morning huddle is going to be our first space to all gather and listen to a few of our community members talk about the topics of discussion that we will grapple with during the breakout sessions and during the day. So I'll start this huddle by presenting, again, day one's core question, right? So as you guys saw when I presented the overall agenda, today we're going to start reflecting on how did we get here, right? So we're going to do that with 3 moments. The first will happen in just a few short minutes before we head to break. It's going to be an interactive exercise that we're all going to do together simultaneously. And we're going to be answering the question, what has happened since last year's convening? We're going to be asking you all to reflect on your organization or your institution, or what you have advanced and worked on during the last year. So there's going to be an interactive, and then there's going to be these two breakouts. So the first breakout again is around impact of COVID and responses from Indigenous communities. And the second breakout is going to be about Indigenous rights and self-determination at this moment of climate change. So to introduce a little bit more about the breakouts and to reflect with us collectively in our morning huddle, I'm going to pass it back to Lourdes, who will then introduce us to our community members who will be speaking to us a little bit more.
Thank you, Anka, for walking us through the agenda and other key information to make this a participatory and engaging 3-day retreat. I'm gonna now welcome the two IFIP members to guide us through these community dialogues. We'll hear first from Mariana Lopez, who will be touching on sharing about the impact of COVID and the responses from Indigenous communities, learning and reflection. Mariana Lopez currently serves as Program Director of Pawanka Fund, an Indigenous-led fund providing leadership in grant making, monitoring and learning, and facilitating grant access to Indigenous communities from the 7 regions of the world, including North America, Latin America, and the Caribbean, Asia, Africa, the Arctic, Pacific, and Russia. Over the last 10 years, Mariana has been involved in many Indigenous peoples' processes as Social Affairs Officer of the United Nations Secretariat of Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and as independent consultant to UN agencies like UNIFEM, UNICEF, the Office of the High Commission of Human Rights, and ECLAC. Mariana was Program Director of International Indigenous Women's Forum, known as FIMI, and she is from Buenos Aires, Argentina. Welcome, Mariana.
Thank you very much, Lourdes. Thank you to everybody. I don't know, Lourdes, if we are going to start with the presentation, or is just now the introduction?
No, please go ahead with sharing, and then I'll move to Galina and introduce her. Thank you, Mariana. And I think you have about 8 minutes or so.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Anka, also for the introduction, and Alma for this beautiful invocation, and Susan for the introduction too. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to share my screen very quickly because I have 8 minutes to talk about Indigenous people and COVID and what happened the last year. But first, I want to take 1 minute to introduce Pawanka Fund. In the case that you don't know Pawanka, Pawanka is an Indigenous-led fund, and the name of Pawanka is a Miskitu word name from Nicaragua, and the meaning is something that is growing and strengthening. And this is our spirit, is something that is growing and strengthening. So Pawanka Fund is a global Indigenous-led fund, was created in 2014 and is led by Indigenous leaders from different parts of the world. As Lourdes mentioned, we are including North America, Latin America, Asia, Africa, the Arctic, Pacific, and Russia. It was created to respond to the need of Indigenous people based on relationship of trust, networking, and the articulation between the local and the global processes. And the objective of Pawanka Fund is to strengthen Indigenous people's self-determined development, promoting and protecting traditional knowledge, learning system, and well-being. So far, we are working with more than 300 local partners in almost 60 countries around the world. And this is just for all of you to understand the different kind of partners where we work in Pahuanca. We work with indigenous communities, but also indigenous women organizations, elders group, youth indigenous organization, national, regional, and global indigenous network, also organization of indigenous people with disability, territorial governments, and groups of indigenous pastoralists or farmers, nomads, mountain peoples, Islanders, fishermen, traditional healers, spiritual leaders, midwives, and also traditional authorities. So our partners in Pahuanca are very diverse, and this really enrich all the process of grant making and also learning and mutual learning that we are promoting in Pahuanca Fund. So what happened in March of 2020, the COVID was declared as a global pandemic. Pahuanca we really was impacted by this pandemic. We see how indigenous people, the pandemic posed a serious health threat to indigenous people around the world. Their communities already experience inadequate access to healthcare, a lack of access to essential services, sanitation, and other preventive measures. So this health problem really impacted in the health of the communities. The lockdowns and the limitation of mobility has been have very exacerbated the consequences of the COVID. As you know, mobility has been an ancestral resiliency strategy for indigenous people. For ancestral time, indigenous people have moved in searching water, pasture for their animals, or exchanging products, even looking for job opportunities in urban areas. So the limitation to mobility have a very serious impact in indigenous communities. As well, for the education opportunity, education access has been in many of them cut. So the illness and death of the elders, the ancestral knowledge holders, has been affecting the health of the communities, and of course, the intergenerational transmission of culture, the collective pain and social disruption for not being able to perform rituals and ceremonies that involve the gathering of the community. So the impact of the COVID, we can say that it has been very serious and deep in the indigenous communities all over the world. So however, we could see in Pahuanca how indigenous communities and indigenous organizations have been able to implement and respond effectively strategies to face the impact of COVID. And also this process have been empowering the indigenous organization in many cases. And these strategies implementing has been based on three main important resilience issues: the self-determination and autonomy of indigenous people, networking, reciprocity, and solidarity, and the strengthening of traditional health and food systems. The regional, national, and umbrella indigenous people organizations have been key to effectively deliver support to the communities. These networks have develop a strategy to access remote and isolate community, establishing communication and containment teams. The communication and support channels were based on the pre-existing organizational structures which were strengthened. So we can see how, despite the pre-existing condition of marginalization and violence that many indigenous people have at the beginning when the pandemic started, the network and the communication channel pre-existing, the indigenous organizational structures of indigenous people have been key to develop effective strategies to face the pandemic. So I will share some of the pictures of the partners of Pawanka that have been implementing many strategies. You can see here how the self-determination and the control of the territories in this picture allow the communities to limit the enter of foreign people to the communities. So we can see youth volunteer groups in Indonesia, this picture, that volunteer to work and patrol and monitoring the access to the communities. We can also see in the other pictures from the Pacific, the Molucco people in the Seram Island, they do not accept guests from outside entering the territory during the pandemic. And the other picture is some youth that they build a tree house to get signal to follow the online studies in their territories. So these are examples on how the autonomy and the control of the indigenous territories allow communities to prevent and to face the spread of the pandemic. Now also one of the key strategies has been the strengthening of indigenous food system, ancestral medicine, and indigenous economy, and in the different regions. We can see here pictures from Latin America, Peru, and also Africa, Kenya, and the revitalization and the rice land restoration in some countries of Asia. So the solidarity and reciprocity, sharing food in different countries, in different communities, the planting short-term crops, the support with seed and tool for building this, for example, crops and planting, but also the herbal gardens to provide medicines, plants to deal with the COVID disease. These are pictures from our partners in Vanuatu and also from one. So we can see in the Pacific how they are implementing these medical gardens to provide medicines for this pandemic. We have been also witness how indigenous people implement innovations and including technical devices to monitoring, to gather information, and also develop monitoring systems to see what was or has been the situation in different indigenous territories. So the first picture is an example of a portal for monitoring the impact of the pandemic on the Amazon territories in Ecuador, and the other picture is a map developed by AMAN and indigenous network of Indonesia, and they were able to monitor the situation of COVID in their territories. also the use of technology as smartphone for communication. Also, Latin America has been developed a regional platform to monitor the impact of COVID and the production of material in local language to prevent and to teach and to spread the information about COVID prevention in different local language, including material sensitive to disability needs, as for example, one of our partners in Nepal that work on with indigenous disability people. So all this strategy implemented by our local partners give us some lessons learned for Pawanka. Pawanka is, as I say, is an indigenous-led fund, and we were not an emergency fund, so we didn't know how to face an emergency. We had to learn how to support our partners in this situation, how we were able to support the building of resilience and developing some strategies to face this pandemic. So some of the key lessons that we have learned from our different support, we at Pawanka issue 32 grants on emergency that reach more than 80 local community. So one of our big lessons has been to trust in the indigenous network to be able to allocate funds quickly and access to communities and remote indigenous peoples. So recognizing the local expertise and knowledge of the local communities and being flexible and develop simple and clear formats and mechanisms to disburse funds. So these are some of our key lessons, and also including the strengthening the communication channels with and among the community, supporting building skill on administration, monitoring, contingency plans, communication system, including the use of modern terminology, as I share, and also supporting cooperation, partnership, and collective action, and being able to adapt and understand indigenous people's needs. So these are some of our lessons that we have been learning in all this process, and we are going to, as Pawanka, we will continue supporting our partner and indigenous people organization in different parts of the world to build resilience and develop their own responses to the pandemic and also other threats and challenges that we have today. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mariana. I think what you just shared encapsulates I think what we've known all along about indigenous peoples, and they're both, despite the fact that they continue to be impacted by many violations of their rights. I think what we've seen here is the incredible ability to move as a community for resiliency, for revitalizing both their traditional practice, particularly in this case tied to traditional medicine and food systems. And we know the food systems, it's a big topic of conversation these days, and incredible just opportunities to what I get out of this, and perhaps what we all kind of think about as we go into the breakouts is, how do we continue to sort of support that governance, that indigenous agency, autonomy, and a just recovery, right? And I think it just shows us that, yes, we can't deny all the different things that indigenous peoples are experiencing despite COVID because access to vaccines has been a key issue. But yet there's so much more that we can be doing as a philanthropic community to now capture this moment and really support Indigenous organizations, Indigenous-led funds, and the communities to really push forward with what the work that is happening locally. Now I'd like to turn to our second topic, which is Indigenous rights and self-determination in this moment of climate change urgency. And I'd like to invite Galina to join me on the spotlight as I introduce her. Galina Angarova is Buryat. She is Executive Director of Cultural Survival. Prior to that, she was Program Officer at the SWIFT Foundation. And prior to that, she was the Policy and Communication Advisor for TEPTEVA. She has presented, she has represented the Indigenous Peoples Major Group at the UN on issues such as the Sustainable Development Goals and the post-2015 Development Agenda, and has led Indigenous experts to review safeguards for Indigenous peoples for the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, Green Climate Fund. And Galina was also the former Russia Program Director at the Pacific Environment, where she organized direct actions to block pipeline construction in the Altai region in Siberia. Galina also served on the board of IFIP for 7 years and is also just recently coming back from COP26. So I hand over the floor to you, Galina.
Thank you, Lourdes, and the team at IFIP for inviting, hosting this event, inviting me to report back to about what happened at COP, if that's helpful, of course. So just a quick greeting in my native language, Sembena Hundutud Hudud. And as mentioned, I am the Executive Director at Cultural Survival, but most importantly, of course, I represent my own clan, my own people, Buryat people in Siberia, and my nation, Ehrid Nation of the Buryat peoples. So Cultural Survival is an almost 50-year-old Indigenous rights, Indigenous-led organization that works to amplify, support Indigenous peoples' right to self-determination, cultures, and political resilience. We are a staff of almost 30 people now, mostly women and mostly Indigenous, based in 10 countries around the world. And we work through a holistic strategy and wraparound programming for Indigenous communities, through advocacy, capacity building, grant making, and communications. And thematically, we work through a rights-based approach on the nexus of several themes, such as climate change solutions, land and livelihoods, cultures and languages, Indigenous community media, and the leadership of Indigenous women and youth as the protagonists and change makers for the future that as Indigenous people we aspire to. So we have just released our new strategic plan actually this morning, and that's what I'm kind of relaying to this group. In regards to the climate change, of course, we are in a very difficult moment collectively at this point, as Indigenous peoples are facing multitudes of challenges related to climate change. Severe droughts, fires, sea level rises, displacement of Indigenous peoples. We're losing crops, our sacred places, livelihoods. And although that Indigenous peoples contribute the least to the greenhouse emissions, unfortunately, globally, we're most impacted by the consequences of climate change. Are the most vulnerable populations, and especially Indigenous women. So, Lourdes, I will report on what happened at COP, correct? And then I'll talk to
You're welcome to do that and fold that into your, yes, you're welcome to do that.
Okay, so for me personally, it was a coming back moment to the movement because I used to be the co-chair of the Indigenous Peoples Caucus and back to 2013. And I also led the climate finance team at the COP and also the Green Climate Fund. So it was an incredible moment to come back to the spaces, but also finding that spaces to be more challenging for Indigenous peoples in general, more challenging. So I would like to speak briefly on what was positive at COP and what was negative too, unfortunately. I think that we as a movement, as a philanthropy that has been supporting Indigenous peoples, we need to stay kind of updated on what's happening in the negotiation spaces. So first of all, I was really happy to see that the Indigenous issues were kind of getting more streamlined in this climate negotiations. There were about over 200 Indigenous representatives at COP. That was like the second largest delegation after an oil and gas delegation of 500 people. But we only from Brazil, we had like 60 people coming and speaking directly at different events, side events, official events, and directly during the negotiation processes. So that was really great to see and hear the diversity of voices from every bicultural region of Indigenous peoples, and we have 7 of them, right? And our representatives worked on all fronts, both inside the venue and of course outside the venue. You probably heard there was a huge demonstrations outside, right? And Indigenous people were leading those protests outside. So that was a really, I think, a great development. And there was a lot of coverage. And while we were at the Indigenous Peoples Pavilion, like there were reporters coming in constantly from BBC, CBS, you just name it, right? So we received quite a coverage during COP this time around. The second good development that happened is the adoption of the work plan of the local communities and Indigenous peoples platform, right? It's an official platform. And the adoption of the 3-year plan for this platform. Also, we secured 1 seat to represent Indigenous peoples in the Climate Technology Center and Network Advisory Body. That was good. I think Fawn Sharp was one of the people who got this approved seat from the United States. Another achievement was the inclusion of the statement in the preamble of the COP26 cover decision, which states parties should respect, promote, and consider their respective obligations on human rights and right to health and the rights to Indigenous peoples. So that was good. So next, the decision also recognizes and acknowledges the important role of stakeholders, including Indigenous peoples, in averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change. So the language on loss and damage is there that includes Indigenous peoples. So that was like one of the main areas of our advocacy as Indigenous peoples at COP. On finance front, several countries and philanthropic donors, including members of IFIP, committed $1.7 billion to Indigenous peoples to protect their forests and territories. Many Indigenous leaders, including Vicky Taule Corpus, for example, voiced their hope that these resources will be effectively and directly accessed by Indigenous peoples and not go through intermediaries, such as states and big conservation organizations. Right. So, and some leaders also mentioned that that 1 billion that was committed by the state actors is actually not new money. It's the existing money that goes through official development aid, so which ultimately will never reach Indigenous peoples. So that kind of into consideration. But I really welcome the the pledges from philanthropic institutions, because this is new money, and especially from the ones that come from IFIP membership. You know, it's really great leadership on their end. So what are the negative developments? I have to tell you that the 1.5 degree goal is barely alive. Is barely alive, considering all the nationally determined contributions from nation states. We're not going to meet the target. We are on track to surpass the 1.5 degree by 2030, or not even maybe sooner, and we will face irreversible consequences. And you know the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees? 40 million refugees. How is this going to impact our economical system? It will collapse. So if we don't do anything urgent about this, this is the future that we're going to face. There are many inadequacies, such as the agreement to phase down rather than phase out of coal production. That's one of the worst things that happened to us, I think, that we are not considering phasing completely out of coal production. So one of the big question throughout COP was Article 6. You probably heard about it, right? So Article 6, just to remind what it is the rule book or an accounting mechanism on how CO2 emissions are going to be accounted for. Right? The decision on Article 6 has been 6 years in the making since the adoption of the Paris Agreement. So that was an outstanding item for the nation states to decide how to account for CO2 emissions. Essentially, it's a system of carbon trading, which will allow big polluters to continue polluting. So my organizational stance on Article 6, that we do not believe in carbon market mechanisms as a climate change solution. And we think they should be scrapped. It should be scrapped altogether. In the context of negotiations, however, these market mechanisms were disguised as nature-based solutions. And scrapping was not going to happen. We knew that the nation states, the majority of the nation states were going with it. So the Indigenous Peoples Caucus has decided to act within the proposed framework and push for inclusion of references to human rights and Indigenous peoples' rights throughout the text of Article 6. I think 6.2, 6.4, and 6.8. So the final mentions are, so there is a final text that mentions the need to respect Indigenous people's rights, but it does not mention the need to obtain free, prior, informed consent. So we hoped for an international grievance mechanism too, but that was downgraded as well. Finally, I'll mention that on finance for developing countries, the capacity of the governments to adapt and mitigate is directly dependent on the provision of financial resources from the rich West or from the developed countries. And yet the commitment to deliver $100 billion every year from 2020 was not reaffirmed. So that was another kind of setback for the developing countries. So I'm gonna pause here, Lourdes, because I have a lot more to say. What needs to be done, because I think there are separate action items for the philanthropy itself, but we can probably talk about it in the group, right?
Thank you, Galina, for sharing with us both how it felt and how some of the positive as well as some of the challenging and some of that still fights to be led by Indigenous peoples and supported by our membership and other funders. As you mentioned, when the climate commitment and the commitments that have been happening both the 1.7 billion plus the 5 billion that was announced a few weeks before the COP, we see that IFIP members have played a leadership role in being part of that commitment. As such, IFIP did also raise our hope that our members will also play a role in being accountable to those commitments and ensuring that Indigenous peoples are directly, and let me just repeat that again, directly benefiting from the funding that you're all committing. Because as I said earlier, it is in your actions, in your decisions, in your grant making that you have the ability, as well as the power as funders, to direct that funding where it needs to go, and to also open doors to Indigenous-led funds, Indigenous organizations to access that funding. But as Galina said, we have opportunity to dive deeper. This is exactly what we're trying to do with this retreat. Hear from community members. We heard from Mariana about the state of where we are post, if we can call it post, I don't know yet, post-COVID, to a place of where Indigenous communities have organized as they have always done, to revitalize their autonomous methods, their governance structures, to respond to COVID, to safeguard their territories. So there's an opportunity to support a so-called just recovery, and that must include Indigenous peoples in the just recovery, and support the priorities and the ways Indigenous peoples are organizing to lead their communities out of the situation that they're in due to COVID, but also to be able to respond to a lot of the challenges that are to come because of sometimes ways that conservation actually plays out in communities where we see violations of rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities in the name of conservation. And as we enter this community space, we're going to hand it over to Anka now, but as we enter into this community space, we're going to break, and I really hope you'll come back and join these conversations, because we have two ways of thinking about this work. What do we still need to do in support of the amazing leadership that we saw at the COP26, that we've seen at the UN food systems, that we're going to be seeing with the biodiversity that we saw in generational equality? What do we do now in this moment? And then how do we continue to support governance structures that have been set in place because of the impact of COVID? Now, I'm going to hand it to Anka, because I know we're taking a bit of her time of what she needs to do to guide us next.
Perfect. Well, first, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mariana. Thank you, Galinda. Thank you, Lourdes. I'm sure that everyone listening is really inspired and hopefully really ready to get into those breakout sessions. Before we do that, we're going to take a break so that everyone can rehydrate, maybe dehydrate with some more coffee or whatever time it is, whatever drink you would like. But before we go to break, we have one more thing that I want us all to do together, which is that interactive that I mentioned a while back. So as a reminder, today we're talking about how did we get here, right? We heard from Mariana about everything that is happening all over the globe where her foundation works regarding COVID-19 and the diverse responses from Indigenous communities. Then we heard from Galinda on the moment of climate change, right after the COP. And we definitely, I know I do, want to continue these conversations. So that will happen after the break. But what we're going to do right now is focus on the interactive that you guys see here, on answering the question, what has happened since last year's convening, right? So we're going to do that in a space called Mural. Right now, if someone from the IFIP team can put the link to the Mural board in the Zoom chat so everyone can access that. And in the meanwhile, I'll tell you guys about what Mural is before I head on over there. So it's essentially a virtual whiteboard. It's akin to, for example, Google Jamboard if you used it before, or a Miro. And if you haven't used any virtual whiteboard, it is like a whiteboard with the ability to put sticky notes on it, but virtual, right? So I will walk us through how to use it. I'm sure that some people have used it before, others might not have. So I will give instructions, I'll repeat instructions, and I'll stay over and give those instructions again if needed. We're here for you to learn how to use it, because we'll also be using this every day as we progress through our agenda. So once you click the link to the Mural board, ooh, I see some anonymous animals already getting in. So once you click the link, the first thing it's going to ask you to do is put your name in, or just click to enter. So you can click as and enter as a visiting horse or a visiting koala, as we see, or Jessica, who is there as the visiting squid. So first step is that you click the link. Second step is that you enter. You can put your name, or you can enter as an anonymous animal. And now what I'm going to do before we answer the question is show you guys briefly how Zoom works. So first, and also feel free to put in any questions into the Zoom chat. I'll respond to them in just a second after I go through the instructions. I love seeing all the animals around here. That's great. So first, the most important part of Zoom is knowing how to, not of Zoom, of Mural, is knowing how to zoom in and out, right? So first, if you have a trackpad or a mouse pad, like most laptops do, you can take your cursor, you can see me, I'm putting my cursor over day 1 here. And this is where my cursor is. I'm gonna zoom in like this with my fingers, boop. And that is exactly where I'm gonna zoom in. To zoom out, you do the opposite motion and you're zooming out, right? So you're zooming in and you're zooming out. I'm sorry if I am causing anyone any nausea. But that is how you zoom. There is another way to zoom for some folks who don't have a trackpad. This is another great way to zoom. So if you see the bottom right corner of the Mural, there's like a mini Mural board there, right? And you can see where kind of everyone is. So you can zoom more in like this. You can zoom out this way also. And then you can move here where you're trying to go also. So zoom in and zoom out. And again, you put your cursor there and you shift. It takes a little bit of getting used to. We're really only going to use Mural for the interactives of the day. So if you do have any questions, please put the questions now in the Zoom chat and also in the help desk. I also see people are already responding, which is absolutely great. So I'm going to tell you guys the other thing is if you get lost in the Mural before we start the advanced writing and drawing on Post-its, as you can see at the very bottom of the screen in the center, there's all of the animals that are there right now. And then there is a non-animal, which is me, because I'm the owner of the board. You can click on my icon and follow me. Right? So you come at the bottom here, here's my icon. You click on my icon and you follow me in case you get lost. And finally, the last instruction is how to use the Post-its, because this is what we really want to do. A lot of you have already gotten the hang of it. So what we can do is we can, first of all, move Post-its anywhere we want. You can move them anywhere on the Mural. It truly doesn't matter. You can expand them and make them smaller, make them bigger. And you can type in them. So once you are clicked on it, like I am, for example, you can then start writing things in here and then delete the text simply that way. So that is how you navigate. That's how you write on the Post-its. And if anyone has any questions, let me just please unmute yourself and ask the questions now. Otherwise, what we're going to do is start answering this first question, which we see here. And it's, I'm just going to move this guy over. The question here being, what has happened since last year's convening, right? Or more specifically, what have you and or your organization done from last year's conversations? We have some examples here that we came up with the IFIP team: advancing rights in your portfolio, supporting Indigenous priorities, grant money directly to Indigenous communities, supporting Indigenous rights and self-determination. The more specific that we can get, the better. And what I would also like to ask from you is to put one idea per Post-it and to put your name or your institution in parentheses at the end of what you're writing so that we know where it's coming from. Okay? So as you all write, which I'm very excited to see all of you writing, there's already a lot of great info here. As you all write, I'm just going to go through the instructions one more time. Feel free to tune me out if you've already heard the instructions and you don't need to hear them again. Okay? So, and let me quickly look at the questions here to see if there are any. Okay. So we're all in the mural link. You're there, you're entering as your name or an anonymous animal, and then you're zooming into where all of the Post-its are. You're grabbing one of the Post-its and you're answering the question, one idea per Post-it. If there are multiple things that you've done since last year's convening, which I'm sure that there are, grab 2 Post-its, grab 3. If you want to create a new Post-it, you just double click, and that's how you're creating new Post-its, right? And again, the question that we're answering is, what has happened since last year's convening? I'm gonna make this guy a little smaller. Down.
I have to say, this is fun to see everyone put in. Thank you for engaging with this. We said that it would be a new, and we are trying new technology, but it makes it more fun, makes it participatory.
And start reading, start inspiring yourself and getting ready for those breakout sessions. See what people have done since last year. And remember, if you wrote some Post-its, to put your name or at least your institution's name in parentheses. So if someone wants to talk to you about, oh, how did you increase funds available to Indigenous organizations? We know to go to Tanya S., right? I would love to know who to go for simplifying our application and reporting process.
Bianca, there's a question, how do we add one more sticky?
That is a great question. And the answer is to just double click. And I can add more stickies for y'all as well. There we go, adding. There's quite a few up here to the right that I would love to know who wrote them, because there's a lot of ones that I'm sure are going to inspire others. And you might want to connect to these folks in SWAPCAR. Supporting Indigenous lawyers, training to Indigenous youth, emergency funds. Long-term training opportunities. An IFIP team, I don't know if you're participating, but feel free to participate. We would love to hear what IFIP's done the last year too. Great. And so as you guys continue, I'll basically how we're going to use these. We'll revisit all of the responses in Mural throughout today and tomorrow on day 3. So we'll kind of reflect back on everything that's happened in the last year, what it is that we want around day 2, in order to, on day 3, start thinking about our commitments. What do we want to commit to? What do we want to aspire to next year, right? So this is really serving as inspiration for your colleagues and the collective. Wonderful. So as we wind down, I want to reiterate Lourdes's thank you to everyone for bearing with us as we try something new. It looks like you're having a lot of fun with it, so that makes us really happy. And unless Lourdes or the IFIP team wants to reflect a little bit on the trends that we're seeing, I think that we could hold off on that until day 3. And I think we can send everyone off for potentially an early break. How does that sound, Lourdes and team?
Yes, and can you remind everyone how long of a break we have?
Yes, yes. So it's going to be a little over, let's say 10 minutes. So let's meet back here at 2 after the hour. And if anyone has Mural questions, I will be staying during the break, but otherwise we will meet back here 2 minutes after the hour. Feel free to just turn off your videos and stay logged on, and we'll see you guys in 10 minutes, 2 minutes after the hour.
Yes, and just a reminder, when you come back, we'll be ready to kind of then split into breakouts based on the dialogues that we just have. So think about the breakouts that you'll be entering. And I'll see you in about 9 minutes, I guess.
Minutes. All right. Bye, everyone. So we have a question here on how do we grab a Post-it? So it depends on the kind of mouse that you have, but generally you just hover over and click the Post-it. That should work for almost all computers. Please, to this person, let me know if that's working for you. And then we have a great question, also a broader, less Mural question, but a good question for this. And it's, if anyone is new here who didn't participate in the conference last year, we would still want you to answer this question in terms of what advancements are you proud of? And do you want to share with the community that you've done in the past year? That's a great clarifying question. So also questions on what's coming after this. So for everyone who's listening to me and for those who are not, we'll come back. We'll immediately be split out into breakout groups. Those breakout groups will last for 55 minutes. Then we'll come back and we'll present for about 10 minutes total. So 2 to 3 minutes per group, we'll present back. And then we'll have a closing and a reflection space, and then we'll close. So it'll be about an hour and a half more after this. Also, for those of you who are still having trouble grabbing a Post-it, there might be 1 or 2 of you. Feel free to send me your ideas via direct message, and I will add them to Post-its for you because we want you still to participate. And for those of you who are here, I'm going to stop sharing my mural and I'm going to give you a sneak peek of the questions that will guide our discussions for the breakouts that are going to happen in a few minutes. So if you want to take a look at the questions and see which breakout is calling on you more, I'll leave this here with you. We're slowly trickling back. For those of you who are back, I'm sharing another slide that hopefully serves as some inspiration, because these are going to be the questions that guide the discussions in the breakout sessions that we're just about to go into. So take some time, read them out as our colleagues join us again, and think about which breakout session you're going to want to attend. I know it's hard to just pick one. All right, so it looks like we're still trickling back. If you, hi everyone, I'm seeing you, even though I'm looking at my screen, I'm seeing all of you. If you've just joined again, what is being projected now are the 3 discussion questions that will guide the breakouts. So read through them. Because more than the topic, this is kind of where we want the discussion to go, right? So read through the discussion questions and start thinking about where is it that you want to go. It's a difficult decision, I know, but hopefully these will give you a little bit of inspiration. All right. So I'm actually gonna just give the instruction one more time. And then I want everyone, at least who's back now, to head into breakout groups right away, to not spend more time just being inspired, but really getting into the meat of it. And I'll stay back for any late joiners and give the instructions, and they can join up the groups later. So welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your few minutes that we gave you of a break. Just so everyone knows kind of what to expect moving forward, we're going to have this discussion, these breakout groups that are going to last a total of 55 minutes. Then we're going to come back and we're going to present back. So discussion 1 will present about discussion 1 to discussion 2. Discussion 2 or breakout 2 will present what they discussed in their breakout, right? So that's going to happen in about 55 minutes. That'll last for 10 minutes. And then finally, we'll have a closing. So the rest of the schedule for today is about an hour and a half more. So if you can stick with us till the closing, we would greatly appreciate it and love to have you all there. But first, the moment that we've all been waiting for, I know in especially the IFIP team, is these breakouts, right? So there are 2 breakouts that are going to be happening simultaneously. You can only pick one, unfortunately. A reminder that they will be recorded. So even if you don't participate in one, you can see what is being discussed in the other one. And let me read these out to you. So breakout 1 is about the impact of COVID-19 and responses from Indigenous communities. And we heard Mariana start to get us in the mindset to talk about these 3 questions that are going to guide this discussion. What does just recovery and just transition look like from an Indigenous perspective? What are our solutions that already exist and we would like to put forward? And 3, what do we need funders and philanthropy to do and act on, right? So that's breakout 1, option number 1. Breakout 2 is dealing with Indigenous rights and self-determination at this moment of climate change. And the questions that are going to guide that discussion are, what lessons are we learning during this time? How can we, both individually and collectively, respond in this moment? And what are the potential ways there are to collaborate, support, and learn from each other? And just like Galinda was saying, there's a lot more to be discussed. And like Galinda prompted, there's also a discussion to be had around the philanthropic community, which is here present as part of the IFIP community. So these are our 2 choices. What we're going to do now is Rachel from IFIP. Hi, Rachel. She's going to help me in in creating the Zoom breakouts. So what she'll do now is, what we'll see is a pop-up of a box, and you'll be able to choose if you want to go into breakout 1 or if you want to go into breakout 2. And you just click to enter your breakout group, and you will find an IFIP facilitator there. They're going to share a note stock with you, and they're going to take you through and facilitate the session that has a brief opening, a warm-up exercise, a discussion that's going to last for most of the 55 minutes, and finally a closeout question. All right, so Rachel, I invite you to do the Zoom magic that needs to be done.
It should be up, and I see a couple of people have already joined. They're
Wonderful.
I'm not seeing it.
You should be able to see a screen of breakouts and then scroll down, and you can select the session you like. And perhaps Winnie and I can support all participants, because Rachel is leading facilitating one of the dialogues.
I think if you're on an older version of Zoom, this has been an issue in a couple of breakouts I've been in. The buttons aren't appearing for some reason. I should have
no
updated
worries.
my Zoom.
Winnie should be able to assign you. So maybe
Yeah, perfect.
you just want to go down the list, and she can assign you, and I'm going to go join my room.
Yeah. If
Have
you
fun
you could just
facilitating.
say,
Oh, sure.
if you could just say which room you want to go to, and then I can.
Sure. Thank
I
you.
can move
Climate,
it.
please, Winnie. Climate.
That's Jessica Brown and
Yeah.
Kwalneska and Rachel, maybe you want to
Thank
join
you.
those breakouts because you're both facilitating.
Elaine, can I go to 2?
What I would also say is there's a button at the bottom that says breakout rooms that you should be able to click. And then there will be a box that pops up. And then you can assign yourself. No, not saying that either.
Yeah.
Go down the list then.
Winnie, can you assign me to room 1, please?
Okay.
Thank you, Winnie.
I can help you.
I also
Okay.
don't have the breakout rooms option. I'd like to be in room 2, please.
Paloma in
Alright.
room 2.
So we have, I see Anna sign, Adrian, Galina, Jose, and Nidia.
Yeah, Lilith, I was just
Alina.
gonna ask, can I go to room 2? Thanks, Adrian.
Galina wants 2. Yes, that makes sense.
I would like to go to the room 2, please, if it's
Media room
possible.
2.
Thank you. Thank you very
Mhm.
much.
All right.
Jose, which room do you want to go to?
Either room number 1, please.
Right.
Right.
Chandra?
We need room number 1.
1. Okay. So I think you can also
just-
assist with the recording while you're there, right?
And just in the future, I can also do this part of I can assign people so that you guys can go to your rooms. Mhm.
Yeah.
And I'm going to stay back. If people drop off or come back in, I'll be here to assign rooms. So no worries about that.
Okay.
All right.
Winnie, what did you say about the recording? Just want to be
I
clear.
know, because she's joined room 1. I think room 1, yeah, the one with Kwalneska, she can assist with the recording just in
Okay.
case of
I
anything.
can also pop out and go. I'm gonna spend half my time on one and half my
Cool.
time on the other one. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna go to 2 and then go back to 1.
Okay.
All right.
Have fun. I'll be here.
Thank you.
Oh, we can also stop the recording, or do we not want to stop the recording of this main room?
I think, yeah, I'll stop the recording on my part of the main room and then resume when we come back.
Great. Perfect. Welcome. I hope that recording is in progress. I hope that everyone had a great session. Thanks to our 2 amazing facilitators, Rachel and Kwalneska. Thank you, thank you. And to you all, I hope that it was a participative experience and that you guys are getting in the mood for the next 2 days. So what we're going to do for the remainder of the time is a quick present back. We want to hear from breakout room 1 and also breakout 2 to hear a little bit about what you discussed, because I'm sure that everyone wanted to be in all rooms. So we want to get a little bit of that. And then we're going to have a healing circle, and then we will close. So let's start by hearing from breakout room 1. Let me just remind you all that we have about 2 minutes to hear about everything that you talked about in 55 minutes. So really try to synthesize as best you can. And who is presenting from breakout room 1, Kwalneska's room?
I will start us off, and then we will add one more person going in.
Awesome.
So thank you all. You know, this group was very inspirational on the ways that they were able to cultivate space for these different groups in the indigenous nations. They went all along from food sovereignty to sharing different herbal gardens to understanding what those different exchanges were like for each other, and also interactiveness with the different medical fields and the doctors and the traditional doctors as well. From the arts, you know, creating different art pathways that really helped cultivate the cultural barriers and the youth, incorporate them together. And I will call upon someone else within group 1, we could go for Mariana, Jose, or Gordon, or anyone else, or Kim.
Well, thank you very much, and the group has been very inspiring. And I want just to maybe to close with a reflection that we have at last minute about the concept of resilience through an Indigenous perspective. I think that is very important to understand what resilience means for Indigenous peoples. And we have that question with our partners, and we ask what resilience means, and we could learn how it's connected by the Mother Earth and also the different ecosystem of Indigenous people. So just to close with that, respecting what resilience means, and maybe have a deep discussion on that.
Wow, thank you. That sounds like an amazing group. I'm really interested also, and we will hear tomorrow, first thing, what track B discussed about. And we'll get a chance to kind of converge, which will be really exciting. Let's hand it over to breakout room 2, Rachel's group. Who is presenting from Rachel's group?
Paloma is going to be presenting for our group. Thank you,
Wonderful,
Paloma.
Paloma.
Thank you. It was decided upon who smiled first, and unfortunately, I automatically smile often, so that was my bad luck. Okay, so here we go. Our first topic question was on what are the lessons that were learned at this time. So something that came up very strongly was the fact that there's a lot of urgency placed on the need to address climate change issues in terms of it being something that can no longer be overlooked. We must address it immediately. If not, we're going to all, see our demise. But the problem is that Indigenous peoples aren't being held at that same standard. Like, we must, at no other cost, we have to address Indigenous rights. We have to defend Indigenous rights. That doesn't receive the same amount of pushing and urgency that climate change does on an international level, on just a more, I don't want to say commercial, but I guess commercial, because there's so many companies that promote climate change, addressing climate change issues, but aren't with that same urgency and that same passion and that same commitment addressing the need for Indigenous rights. So that was one of the key things that we spoke about. Transparency coming from the funders' perspective to the Indigenous community side. And then lastly, just the things we really need to look at to making sure that we are providing accessibility to funding for Indigenous communities, making sure that we're recognizing the fact that a lot of Indigenous communities are not registered, and what are we doing to make sure that Indigenous communities can still receive funding despite the fact that they might not be registered within the state. And it's not just the cost of registering, it's also arriving to the offices that they need to arrive to, which is an all-day or multi-day affair. Literacy issues that might not even get them the accessibility to signing up. So expanding the frameworks under which also organizations and nonprofits, philanthropic groups require Indigenous communities to adhere to, as opposed to the other way around, instead using Indigenous frameworks that the philanthropic groups or organizations can adapt and adopt. So these are just some of the things that came up.
I love that. Thank you, Paloma. Thank you for smiling first. You were a great presenter. Is there someone else that wants to add something to either of these groups, or has a question for the other group? I'm curious to hear. Yes, thank you, Paloma. Thank you, everyone. Sí, please.
One comment that came up was that resonated is pay for expertise, to not be extractive in terms of taking Indigenous knowledge and essentially consulting with Indigenous people without adequately compensating for that valuable information.
Yeah, that's huge. Pay for expertise, pay for time spent, right? That's amazing. And I'm really excited that we have those notes docs. I know especially breakout 2, you guys were typing down all of the notes. That makes me really happy to see, because afterwards we're going to be IFIP, the community, is going to be kind of grappling a little bit more with those notes, synthesizing them, and then similar to last year, putting out some sort of report that we can all see and come back to. Also, those notes docs are going to be open. So if there are things that you still want to say that you felt that you didn't get to in the conversations, go back to those notes docs and write them up in there. Same goes for the mural. That's going to stay open throughout the conference. So even if we're on day 2 or day 3, you can come back to the mural of day 1 and you can continue to reflect on what you've done in the last year. So yes, and a reminder from Rachel, thank you to all of our note takers. Trisha, I think there was one person also for group 1, thank you. And with that, our first discussion sessions, breakout rooms, are over. Thank you all for being a part of them. I hope that you enjoyed. And now to close out the day for track A, I'm going to pass it over to Winnie, who will introduce our healing circle.
Thank you, Anka. And thank you everyone for being here and for your participation during this retreat. We really appreciate it, and we're looking forward to the next 3 days. In the next session, I want to introduce to us Melina Labucan Massimo, and who's the Director of Healing Justice, and Pal Kotishok, Healing Justice Assistant from ICA. This is the Indigenous Climate Action. It's an organization guided by a diverse group of Indigenous knowledge keepers, water protectors, and land defenders from communities and regions across the country. They believe that Indigenous people's rights and knowledge systems are critical to developing solutions to climate crisis and achieving climate justice. What they're going to do for us during this healing circle is they're going to provide a short discussion on what healing justice looks like from an Indigenous perspective, and will also lead us in centering and grounding practice that will help us close out the day and today's session. So welcome, Melina and Paul.
Hi, Kichimanitu. Thank you so much for having us here today. Tansuwakia, Niumalina Miawapin Lamokan Masmoni and Hiao Kinaskumtanawa. That's my language for introducing myself. I am Lubukon Cree. Nihiao is our language for Cree, and was born in my reserve, my community called Little Buffalo, which is in northern Alberta. So I'm calling in from so-called Canada and then from unceded Lekwungen territories in so-called Victoria and so-called British Columbia. And it's nice to be here today, and we're going to just jump right in because I know we have limited time to talk about healing justice and close with the healing justice circle. So I'll pass it back to Pearl.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here with you so much. I'm calling in from the indigenous lands of the Cora and the Paracu people in Baja, Mexico. And I'm really happy to be joining you all today. So we're looking forward to talking briefly about what healing justice is, and pass it back to Melina to do that. And then I will close it with a short healing circle.
So I'm going to actually share my screen really quickly to just go over images. I find images helpful and effective to introduce sometimes new concepts for folks, but we're talking a little bit about healing justice from self-care to collective care and what that means. Also, it's a new pathway that we've been developing at Indigenous Climate Action, and I'll explain why. And the question is that we're bringing to the group today is how do we support the most impacted communities to thrive instead of just survive? So you know, the cycle of burnout is a very real thing that many of us are very familiar with. And there's studies that are online that you can find that's showing that how burnout is quite common, and that, you know, even with peace activists have quit activism for, you know, after 6 years of getting involved, and that burnout is very prevalent, not only in non-Indigenous communities and organizations and movement spaces, but also even more prevalent amongst structurally oppressed people, BIPOC people, because they're not only dealing with the stresses of, quote, activism and land defense, but also every days of racism and oppression, and also violence against the state. I'm just gonna, so to take it even further into what I don't even like to call burnout, but just, you know, myself included, have been bedridden from doing 20 years of frontline organizing and land defense work. So violence against the land is violence against the people. So as many of us know here today, you know, we are criminalized for the work that we do in our own homelands, myself included, and many people that I stand and have worked with and walked with over the past 2 decades. And, you know, I know many people that have major health issues because of this. And so that's why we've decided to bring about healing justice in a very real and tangible way to our organization, and ideally to the larger movement spaces, because it's not just enough to talk about it, but we need to really start to arm people with how do we support these types of programmings, to not just do the land defense, but also to do the healing as well. So that's why we can put the link in the page, but this is taken from a blog that we have on our website around healing justice as a framework that recognizes the impact of trauma and violence on individuals and communities, because we are in a system in society that actively targets Black, Brown, and Indigenous and Asian bodies with violence, oppression, and terror. So healing justice includes the well-being of people, not just surviving, which is pretty much what's happening with most Indigenous communities, but also thriving. And we need to get to those places. But, you know, I myself and many people that I've talked to, we don't see those spaces or places provided or created for our community because we're in such crises. So this idea that self-care is not a luxury, it is a priority and a necessity. And then, you know, obviously people have probably seen this book, but I like this quote, that everyone has a responsibility to make things right. Everyone has a role in the process of healing, regardless of whether they've caused or received more harm. All of our suffering is mutual, and all our healing is mutual, and all our thriving is mutual. So that's a really quick kind of breakdown of healing justice. We could talk about it for much longer than that, but I know it's been already a long day of people processing, so we didn't want to throw a lot of information, and we're going to talk a little bit more tomorrow around how funders can fund these types of programs and the types of programs we're building out. But we're going to go into a healing justice circle now to close, and I'll pass it back to Pearl.
Thanks so much, Melina. Like Melina said, we're going to talk a bit more about our stories and our work, and a bit more about the funder philanthropic context for this work tomorrow. But we know that today is short, and we've gone through a lot of learning and information today. So we were just going to actually close out the day with we're calling it a healing circle, or a gratitude circle, I guess, a time to be in our bodies together. Healing justice really calls for us to be changed in our consciousness, more than just in our minds and our thoughts, a place that's deeper than that. So we're really grateful that IFIP has acknowledged the importance of opening and closing our time together with these types of spaces, such as we shared earlier with our elder Alma, which was really beautiful, and thank you for that. So we really wanted to take the time to practice this healing work together in these spaces. The reason why we do that is to remember that we're relating human to human, and remembering the more than human world. Remembering that we're more than spreadsheets, budgets, applications, reports. We're real, live human beings that are struggling on the front lines of doing this work we've dedicated our lives to, and that we're committed to seeing through to the end. We do these healing circles to ensure that we're building our power both personally and collectively, and to know that we're stronger together, and that our movements will endure and bring about the change we see in our world. Both me and Melina are survivors of quite serious trauma and coming out of that. And I've also been off work for 5 years, and I've just come back to be able to share this work with you. So we're really honored that we have this time and your attention to learn about this. And if you want to talk to us any further, our emails are in the chat, and we'll also be closing out tomorrow's day as well. So maybe if we wanted to just move into a bit of a heart space, I think that creating healing in our work in philanthropy means that we have to also find our healing within. It has to first start personally, organizationally, and also with everyone in all life that we serve. My elder always told me that the longest road you'll ever walk is from your head to your heart. So I just kind of doing this in honor of his teachings and his help in my own healing journey. So if you start with me by just closing our eyes and coming together in spirit, take 3 deep breaths together. Inhale, exhale, inhale, and exhale, and inhale, and exhale. Now placing your hands on your head, acknowledging with gratitude your mind today and all the information we've just taken in together and all the learnings that we've shared. Ask yourself, what is one amazing thought that I'm having in this present moment right now? If you wish, ask for guidance in navigating the mental realms of how we can best serve the communities and all life that we give to and work with, the animals, plants, the earth. And remember, as we said earlier, about our responsibility. What is our responsibility to this work? Inhale together and exhale. Placing your hands on your heart, we acknowledge with gratitude our hearts and our bodies and all that we were touched by today in the feeling realms of our being. Ask yourself, what is one thing you are feeling right now? And as we breathe, we fill our own heart and where personal healing can happen for us. Collectively, we remember the hearts of all that we serve and to recognize the brokenness that we can help to heal. We all share a role in healing, personally and collectively, and as we heal ourselves, we can heal each other. Ask yourself, what is your relationship to this work and those we serve, and how do we deeply respect this work within? If you wish, you can invite in wisdom to help guide you in the work of your heart. Inhale together and exhale. Placing your hands open in front of you and looking at them with our eyes open. We acknowledge with gratitude the work that we do and the strength we have to continue in this work together. Ask yourself, what is one thing you're excited to do from this moment onwards to further this healing work? Ask yourself what your hands can do to heal the lives of those you serve and the planet. What can you do to act in reciprocity? If you wish, you can invite in wisdom to help guide you in the work of your hands. Integrating all aspects of ourselves, our mind, body, spirit, and recognizing our interrelatedness and interdependence as we continue to strive for a better world and for our collective healing. All my relations, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pearl and Melina, for that wonderful close and for sharing with us the work that you do and for the reminder to each one of us to just take time to heal and take time to self-reflect in the work that we do. So thank you so much for that, and we look forward to the next sessions that we have with you. And as we come to a close of today's session, again, I thank you for coming. I thank you for being here. I thank you for opening up your minds and sharing your experiences and your thoughts with us, during the breakout sessions and even at the beginning for our speakers who came earlier to talk to us about the experiences with COVID and COVID-19 recovery with Indigenous peoples and the climate change. Thank you so much for all of that. And we want to welcome you back tomorrow, same time, same place. where we can have more rich discussions, where we can share more information and just have a rich exchange. So I wish you a wonderful day. For those who want to join us for track B, you're also quite welcome to come and join us later on. Please keep looking at the swap card. We have information there, or you can keep looking at the agenda so that you can prepare yourself for tomorrow. And we can keep connecting on swap card, on email. Please let us know if you have any questions, or if you have if you need any information about anything. We're available to offer that to you. So please feel welcome to do so. And we hope to see you tomorrow, and we wish you a beautiful day. So goodbye and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.